All right, hello everyone. Thank you all for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. So again, my name is Jeremy Hardy. I'm a Training and Technical Assistance Manager for Men Can Stop Rape.
William Harris, Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator at Men Can Stop Rape.
So thank you all for joining us for this webinar on what is healthy masculinity today. We're excited to get into it with you all and are really pleased that you all are here. I would just say, we had sent out the, invitation to join us, and within maybe a couple of hours, it filled up to the maximum number of registrants. So we're just excited to be working with you all and feel that there's, a need for this conversation. So we hope that you get something out of this and that you, participate as much as possible to the extent that we make it so. So just to do a little bit of housekeeping, first of all, we want to make sure that you all can hear us, but what we are going to do is keep everyone on mute. We would ask you all to participate in the conversation by typing into question box or the chat box. Either of those functions, we'll be keeping an eye on them. So please do submit your questions or any answers that you have there. If you have any questions about how to get there, we really encourage you to, seek your panel and look at the technology that's in front of you. So we're going to be keeping everyone muted the whole time. The chat box will be the main way that we ask you all to participate. At the end, what we're going to do is open up some time for questions. And so we'd ask you to use the raise your hand function, and then we will unmute you individually to give you some space to ask the question, with your own words, and so everybody can see. But likewise, if you would prefer to submit a question at the end into the question box by typing in, that's also an option too. We'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So let's get started. So I just want to give you all a quick introduction to Men Can Stop Rape and talk a little bit about us and our work. So we were founded in 1997 when a group of guys came together and basically asked the question, how can men be involved in preventing gender-based violence? How can we be allies with women in the work that's already going on? And one of the ways that we figured we could do that was by focusing on masculinity, and we felt that a lot of the work that had existed up to that point often sought out men as the target audience, potentially as perpetrators. And while we know that the vast majority of sexual assaults and gender-based violence incidents occur at the hands of men, we also know that the majority of men are not violent. So we wanted to take a positive approach by looking at healthy masculinity. And one of the ways that we do that is by engaging people in their stories, whether they be personal, social, or cultural. And, again, we believe in long-term sustainable relationships and a sustained approach to the work. And so our belief is that it's for a lifetime. It requires dosage, and it means having multiple touches with the conversation. So just a little bit about what we do. I'm going to turn it over to Will to talk about our Most and Wise Club.
Yeah, so just like Jeremy just said, one of the ways that we really strive to help our young men and boys and our young women and girls as well engage in the fight against gender-based violence is through our Most and Wise Club. So these are clubs that are run in middle school, high school, and college campuses. And the idea is that we want to give young people a safer space where they can talk about some of these ideas as it relates to masculinity or femininity. Also, we make connections to identity and other forms of oppression. So it's really just about giving our young people the space to have these conversations. And they work through our curriculum, which is a 21-week curriculum, which is full of activities and guidelines to help foster those conversations. So that's one of the ways that we try to engage our young people around the work.
And you were also a Ministering Club member yourself, right?
Yes, I am a veteran Most Club member. I completed high school in 2008 and was a Most Club member from 2004 to 2008.
So in addition to the Most and Wise Club, which encapsulates our youth development programming, we also do training and technical assistance work, and that is captured here with the Consolidated Youth and Engaging Men program. That's a grant that we co-lead with also the Alliance for Local Service Organizations that's based out of Chicago, and that grant is out of the Office on Violence Against Women Consolidated Youth Grant. In addition to that, we also have created Men Can Stop Rape's new Healthy Masculinity resource bundles, which is in service of our trainings and workshops for professionals who are looking to engage the community in some way around healthy masculinity, whether it be through more workshops and programming for students on campus or for youth that you serve or for other institutions and organizations that you work with. And some of the bundles that you'll see here are, about introducing healthy masculinity, about having conversations, how it connects with primary prevention, and then, of course, our healthy masculinity and athletics bundles. In addition to that, we have got our Healthy Masculinity Training Institute, which is a 3-day training institute. It's the nation's most comprehensive healthy masculinity training for professionals. We host that at least twice a year here in DC, and invite folks to join us in the city for the 3 days, where we go through all of our approaches, theories, trainings, exercises, and really invite professional development and networking that comes with those trainings. We also work in a third realm or leg of the organization, which is public education. So our Where Do You Stand bystander intervention and consent campaign, which you can see here, has been refreshed as of 2018. And the idea of this campaign is to not only raise awareness of men's participation in bystander intervention, but also to role model some situations in which men have intervened. To pose the question, where do you stand, is built on the foundation of identity forming public education materials, and really posing the question as opposed to telling them what they should do. We're asking, what would you do? And so that public education campaign is another part of our work that we do really in collaboration with the youth development programming in the high schools and middle schools, as well as the college campuses, the military, and several other institutions where we've worked before. Lastly, we've got our Ask DC mobile platform and website. So Ask DC, Ask stands for Assault Services Knowledge, and of course DC stands for the District of Columbia. So that is a mobile platform and website in which we've consolidated sexual assault related resources for different communities, including college campuses that are here in the district, Duke University, the state of Arizona, other areas too, where once you've gone to the website or have the app in your phone, you can store emergency medical information. You can set up emergency contacts who you can get in touch with a prepared message with a couple of taps of your fingers, as well as find out where you can get a safe or sane exam, if that's something that you're looking for, what legal services are available to you, where you can seek counseling or get other kinds of services that are related to mental health, and also learn about bystander intervention trainings that are happening in your community. So the idea with having this app and this website is that everybody becomes a walking resource where they can support one another with the information that they need to not only be a preventive bystander, but also to be effective in response. So that's just a little bit about Men Can Stop Rape and some of the stuff that we do, and we'll get into some of that and return to the bundles towards the end of the webinar. So one area where we want to engage you and ask you some questions is, here with framing the conversation, we want to know from you, what are some stories that are frequently told about masculinity, particularly in popular culture? Like when we ask you, what does it mean to be a man, or what are dominant sort of stories that are associated with what it means to be a man, we'd like to know from you, what is the first thing that comes to mind? What are a couple of words that you can think of that really illustrate this kind of story of masculinity that's frequently told? So please just send in your responses to the questions and chat box here, and we'll be monitoring those and shouting them out. So we've already got one from Amy Brandon. It says, men must be strong, capable, tough. We got Robert saying they're strong, stoic, unyielding.
Responsible from Connie, locker room talk from Sade. We also have men must provide security from Caleb. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And where do these messages come from?
Men don't show emotions, that's right. Aggressive, strong. What's the DPN? We've got George says the DPN. Media, don't cry. Media, traditional norms, act like a man. Yeah, The Godfather. Yeah, exactly. So, these are some places where, to answer Will's question, parents too, where some of these stories about masculinity come from, and how they are shared and told. Movies, lived experiences, literature, yes, absolutely. So all of these different things really highlight not only the breadth and the expanse from which the stories come, but also the centrality of what that story is, that it only allows for a few different components in the expression of manhood for boys and men. Feminine men are gay, and that's funny, used for comedic relief. Yeah, again, pointing to the harm of what is feminized in our culture. So yeah, those are all absolutely right, and thank you all so much for jumping into the question so readily. So just to support that, we have here just a little consolidation of the 50 movies all guys should see before they die. That was on Pop Crunch, and this movies is this list. The movies in this list are pretty much everything that chick flicks are not, right? So again, we're defining masculinity as something that is not feminine. And the things that are associated with femininity are some of the things that we may talk about a little bit in this conversation about healthy masculinity as well. But you all can see that just from the posters of these movies, with Casino Royale, Pulp Fiction, or Fight Club, there is a serious presence of weaponry, of violence, of men sort of at the forefront in a very muscular or imposing kind of demeanor and stature.
It all seems aggressive to me.
Yeah, and if women are in the picture, they're in the picture in a way that is spectacleizing them or is using them as only a secondary part of the story. Again, what it says is that there is a lead masculine role that exists and a following feminine role that exists, if there's even any women on the cover. So this is an example that we point to of just, one way of identifying and looking at what dominant stories exist about masculinity in our culture. And movies are an easy place to start. And to the point that you all had made, there are a lot of other places too where we can go, looking at literature and our families and other sources of this kind of story. So for us, these dominant stories are related to unhealthy masculinity insofar as, they're stories about conquest. They can be on the ball field, in the bedroom, in the boardroom, on the streets, any kind of environment that you can think of. The idea is that there is a one up and a one down. There's a better than position and a less than position. And for boys and men, the world of unhealthy masculinity is so deeply imbued with the sense that you're either a winner or a loser. And so what we want to talk about today is how we subvert that using healthy masculinity. So just to give you all a quick definition, we define dominant stories of masculinity as it relates to masculinity, a narrative representing the widely shared cultural values and messages that characterize what it means to be a man. And these dominant stories of masculinity can be unhealthy or healthy. So, Will, what would be like an example of like a healthy kind of dominant story?
So a healthy dominant story that I can think of, my younger brother is a father. My niece is 4 years old. And one of the things that I think I see him celebrating with his daughter, even though she's only 4, is just kind of like thinking about ways to better engage her as as a father of a daughter, and really thinking about the words that he's using, really thinking about the toys that they buy her, making sure that these things aren't necessarily gendered, so that she feels that she's not growing up in a way where she's being put into any type of box. I think it's also important to know that my younger brother was also a member of the Most Club, so I think the work that we've done has influenced his parenting style as well. So I'm just thinking about different ways that people are actively seeking to kind of like debunk the stereotypes that relate to men and women specifically.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Will. And we're seeing here just some comments too. To your point, Bradley, where it's saying there's not always a winner-loser dynamic. Amy then followed up by saying men provide for their families. Another role that we see as, being part of the dominant story but not being unhealthy by itself is men being providers or men playing a protective kind of role in families. And George, I see you there with the story about the Knicks and, the other players that said they had female tendencies based on the style of play and apologized. I just wanted to capture that too, that you would share that in reference to the question about dominant stories of unhealthy masculinity.
Yeah, and if I may, I just want to point out that, when we talk about the dominant stories, we're not necessarily saying that all aspects of a dominant story of masculinity are wrong, right? So there's nothing wrong with men being providers for their family. We're just saying that some of the unhealthier aspects kind of work to put men into this in this box where if they don't live up to all of these like ridiculous standards, then they're somehow less of a man or less manly.
So, Will, let's talk for a second about how this connects to, men's violence against women and other forms of gender-based violence. So if there's, these messages about what it means to be a man that can be confining, that can limit, the scope of masculinity for boys and for men, then how does that connect to violence against women in particular? Can you talk about, like, the first things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, the idea that we were talking about earlier where, one of the things that we show in our workshops is a clip from The Sandlot, and there's these two teams of like rival young men, and they're basically like trading insults with each other. But the end-all insult is when one of the characters tells another character that he plays ball like a girl. So for me, when I hear that statement, it automatically sets up, like you said, like that less than type of situation where, the worst thing you could call a young man or a boy or a man is to associate him with a woman. Mm-hmm. So I think that once you set up that type of dynamic, it becomes easier for people in general to look at women in kind of a way that puts them, on a lower threshold than men.
Yeah, and to build on that, if that's the premise upon which, boys are taught to understand their relationship to girls, it goes back to the toy commercials that they see that are telling them to be heroes and ninjas and use, Hot Wheels or engage, again, in that, one up, one down dynamic, where they start out by seeing girls as another, as a place of insult, a thing to measure their boyhood or their masculinity against, which, when built upon, is a part of the foundation that we see in the roots of violence against women at the hands of men in a lot of different cases. So what we want to do now is transition to, some of the questions that we have about other stories of masculinity. And Amy, I see your comment. I want to come back to what you said in a little bit because it's going to build on where we're going with this.
Yeah, great.
So what we want to do now is think about what are some stories about masculinity that are less frequently told. And we want to use this as an entree into looking at, what healthy masculinity is and kind of how we at Men Can Stop Rape talk about what healthy masculinity is. So with that, Will and I are just going to do a little bit of, chatting here and really kind of model for you what is the essence of one of our foundational exercises. The exercise is called The Strongest Man You Know. And so we ask people, who is the strongest man that you know? Or, what are examples of healthy masculinity that you experience, that you have experienced in others, things that represent your own idea of strength of healthy masculinity without really giving you much of a definition. So can you talk a little bit about, what your responses to that would be?
Yeah, so if I think about the strongest man that I know or stories associated with masculinity that aren't necessarily shared that often, it makes me think of my grandfather. My grandfather was a Marine veteran and served a number of years there. But he was very stoic and very kind of standoffish a bit. But the thing that I remember most fondly about him is that, every night before we sat down for dinner, he would stand my grandmother up and give her, 3 kisses on the lips and told her that he loved her. And for me and my brother, I think it was a very visceral experience of affection, and just like it helped me realize that you can be, more than one way as a man and still be a man. So here's this guy who's, Marine, veteran, very stoic, very standoffish, but he still takes the time to let his wife know that he loves her, and did so in a way that was very public. And I just think that set a really good example for my brother and I around the idea that men can, still be manly and show affection.
Thanks, Will. And yeah, I appreciate that too, because I think that there's a certain kind of boundary, that there's a place for where affection, is appropriate, and how it shows up in the family and life, and how that, kind of messaging impacted you, and it's impacted your relationship to others. I would just, for my story, I always come to think of, one of the first people that comes to mind when I think of a strong man or somebody that represents healthy masculinity is my coach. So I was a varsity athlete at Goucher College, and my coach Brian was, a real leader for me in that area. And one of the things that I appreciate about him is his way of being, a bystander and intervening. I talk about him as being the greatest bystander I've ever seen, because the speed with which and the accuracy with which he would intervene on, problematic or disruptive behavior for us as boys was really, the thing that role modeled learning in a very, very significant and impactful way while I was on the soccer team. So, for example, if you were late to practice, he would tell you to go back to your room right away and that you were suspended, and you knew that you had to wait at his office afterwards because that was the expectation. He said it from the get-go. When we first met as a team in preseason, that the philosophy of our team is to do the right thing. There's a right thing to do and there's a wrong thing to do. And what he's pointing to is not just the moral stance, which is its own kind of debate, but really getting you to think about your actions. He's intervening in a primary prevention way as a soccer coach working with a bunch of boys. And I had no idea that that's what he was doing when he was telling us all this. But now that I have this lens, I do see it there. The other thing too, in addition to him being a fierce leader and coach and really, challenging us in all the ways that are associated with competition in athletics, which we associate with dominant stories of masculinity, he also was able to be tender with me in moments when I needed help and when I was seeking his counsel and guidance. So in that respect, his ability to be tender in the moments that was called for and assertive in the moments that was called for is, the thing that for me totally represents what healthy masculinity is and what it's all about. And I would just say that, his example that he set for me and my teammates really, helps guide and deeply impacted me, especially in my relationship to the work and what it means to be a man.
Great. I think that, that comes up a lot of times when we do this activity with our young people. A lot of them speak of, their fathers, their coaches, mentors. I think, across the board, we all have these experiences, and I think part of this work for me is being able to make sure that we lift up these experiences that may not be highlighted as often. So when we, as an organization, helped to launch the Healthy Masculinity Action Project back in 2012, which is a national initiative that sparked an international healthy masculinity movement, at that initial summit, we asked people, what are the words that immediately come to mind when we ask you, what is healthy masculinity? And so this next slide is a word cloud that really captures all the responses that we got in that summit. So one of the things that, stands out really here is that respect is the largest word. That's one of the things that stands out to me. And we in our trainings, are mindful that respect can mean something different to a lot of people. And yet, as that is put together with equality, honest, compassion, kindness, accountability, and of course love, we really see that the kind of message of healthy masculinity that we envisioned, or as those participants at the summit envisioned then, really stands and holds up to kind of blending things that we have as a society feminized with things that we as a society have seen as, traditionally part of masculinity. And so we just
just wanted to show this to you all as another dose of, kind of capturing not only what healthy masculinity could be, but the expansiveness of it. So where the dominant story confines you and says that you can only be a man in a certain way, the counter story says that there are many ways to be a man and that you have the option to choose, that it is not only defined by one particular story or one particular performance of masculinity. Would you add anything, Will?
No, I think that's spot on. I was just looking at Ariana's comments about the person who intervened at the bar. Just thinking about connecting that to the idea of compassion, right? Seeing someone in need of help or support, and then being willing to step in and be compassionate and help that person out. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So for us, counter stories in healthy masculinity are in many ways stories of emotional expression that are other than anger, stories that conflict with dominant stories of what it means to be a man, and of course stories that suggest the possibility of a different understanding of strength. So if the dominant story says that strength is only physical, or strength is a kind of mental tenacity, that you will achieve your goal no matter what, where the ends justify the means, the counter story is saying that there are different kinds of strength, that there's strength in character, there's strength in standing up for and doing the right thing, especially when the right thing means intervening in a situation like the one that Ariana shared with us.
All right, so now that we have a pretty solid understanding of the dominant story of masculinity, now we want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the counter story. So the counter story is a narrative that resists the values and expectations of masculinity's dominant stories, and therefore they represent a moral shift. And this is adapted from Hildy Nelson's book, Damaged Identities, Narrative Repair. And the thing that always sticks out to me about this definition is that word resist, right? So it's not just being able to recognize that, aspects of masculinity are unhealthy, but actively seeking to, debunk those and actively, working against some of those negative aspects of masculinity is what we encourage our young people and people in our training to do as it relates to the counter story.
And I'm glad that you focused on the word resist too, Will, because for us, a lot of times too, when we think about, what it means to be participating in primary prevention of men's violence against women and other forms of violence, part of that is, it's rare that you as a person will kick down the door and prevent a violent incident or a sexual assault from occurring, but it is much more likely that you as a person in the world will be in a conversation with friends or in an environment where harm is, going to be happening or on the precipice of happening, or someone saying something harmful, and you have the capacity to influence that environment. Your own resisting of the dominant stories of masculinity is changing the environment of you, and your own actions that are participating in healthy masculinity by contributing to, the different kinds of aspects of public health that are contributing to, the love and the goodness that are in an environment are all part of, the act and learning process of what we think of as a counter story and healthy masculinity. So we want to wrap up here just by showing you all our working description of healthy masculinity in its 5 components. And so real quick, what I'll just say is, that we historically as an organization have not wanted to define healthy masculinity in a concrete and sort of set way. And part of the reason that we call it a working description is because it is always evolving. It is something that has an expansiveness and capacity to change.
It's as fluid as masculinity itself.
That's right. So for us, we think about it, and it's loosely based on theories about bias and intervention. We start with recognizing unhealthy aspects of masculinity that are harmful to the self and others. We think about it as then developing the ability to empathize with the self and others. We think about it as supporting gender equity and other forms of equity. That healthy masculinity means replacing harmful, risky, and violent masculine attitudes and behaviors with emotionally intelligent attitudes and behaviors that respect the self and others.
Jeremy, if you can briefly speak more about the connection with social and emotional learning.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So, again, and dovetailing with this last point about learning and using emotional and social skills to constructively challenge unhealthy masculine attitudes and behaviors expressed by others, is connected to how we think about social and emotional learning in the context of the collaborative for academic and social emotional learning definitions, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, self-management, and, the ways that these things are all connected to not only empathizing with yourself and developing a relationship with yourself that is positive and in the service of healthy self-esteem, but also is in service of that for others, too. Will, would you add any other things, too, that just to crystallize our definition of healthy masculinity, things that it makes you think of?
Yeah, I'm thinking of that second bullet point, just thinking about being able to empathize with the self and others, and also seeking out other forms of equity. I think I mentioned it earlier, but one of the other things that we want our young folks to be able to do, and the people that we do trainings and workshops for, is to be able to connect unhealthy or dominant stories of masculinity to other forms of repression, right? So we believe that, there's no problem or social ill that society has that can't be addressed through promoting healthier forms of masculinity. So whether that relates to, homophobia, racism, misogyny, patriarchy in general, we really believe that, once we're able to kind of like debunk these negative stereotypes or negative forms of the dominant story of masculinity, we'll also be able to, alleviate some of the problems that come from other forms of repression as well.
And I love that you said that too, because, where we see this kind of lens of dominant and counter stories as an entree into other aspects of your life, it's a tool that you can use for a lifetime. That's the design of it. And, once you start to understand that, you can ask questions about stories that you may have never questioned before, that kind of skill set and thinking is the one that we want to support in saying, what other questions have I not asked that I can ask now? What are some conversations that I'd like to have that I haven't felt like I could have for any reason, whether it be with myself, my friends, family, any kind of conversation that is in service of this. So this is where we'll be, basically wrapping up, folks. So, we really just appreciate all of your participation thus far. And again, these are our sort of 5 main points of our working description of healthy masculinity. And we would really invite you to, come up with your own, or to, work with us to develop something that, resonates with you. The question I would leave you with is, what is your definition of healthy masculinity? What would it look like if you were to put it together? And so for us, we also, center on a strength approach. Again, the counter story is moving away from just physical strength. It is strength in speaking up for what's right, for speaking from the heart, a strength as a commitment to the self, others, and community. And this strength-based approach is, also really highlighting the positive, the things that men can do, or the things that are actually within our capability, the things that invite people into the conversation, rather than shutting them out. Back to our positive approach and focusing on healthy masculinity. So we'll just wrap up here a little bit. Again, we've got bundles that we've created, resource bundles, to help prepare communities who are wanting to do some kind of engaging men / primary prevention work, whether it be with adult men, boys, professionals, adolescents, anybody in between. And so the 4 bundles that we have right now are the introductory healthy masculinity bundle, the community conversation bundle, where we have a storytelling event that is based on stories about healthy masculinity. We've got our bundle about primary prevention, and really focusing on how healthy masculinity connects with going upstream in the public health approach to primary prevention, stopping violence before it started. And then we've got our athletics bundle, which is really a year-long initiative in which an athletics department, whether it be, at a high school level or a college level, or with professionals, can engage sport as a resource for the prevention of men's violence against women. That it is that kind of resource for a community in terms of lifting up the leadership and spirit of activism that has historically been a part of athletics. So just a little bit about the Healthy Masculinity Resource Bundle. We would come in and train others. It provides workshop materials, our evaluation form, our What is Healthy Masculinity one-pager, and of course the idea is to produce sustainable, measurable outcomes at each level of the environmental change model by emphasizing primary prevention, social and emotional learning, and healthy masculinity. And in addition to the one-pager and the theories and the evaluation forms, you also get 25 Where Do You Stand posters, 2 hours of additional technical assistance from us, and of course, the Healthy Masculinity Training Manual that outlines and details all the different components of the training that we would be doing. George, I see your question. When is the next Healthy Masculinity Institute? So we host them twice a year, once in January and once in July here in Washington, D.C. So you all, can be a part of the email outreach that we do if you'd like, where we can send you the information about the Healthy Masculinity Training Institute, and so you can learn more about it there. So what we want to do now is transition into some questions, and we've already got one from a participant, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is it Kaifa? So we've got, in today's climate, one of men's biggest fears are being accused of a form of sexual assault. So how do we initiate dialogue around perhaps questionable past behavior as a way to heal and learn without triggering defensiveness? Now, I just want to say and lift up this question as being really, really insightful and on the pulse of today's, cultural conversations about masculinity. And I would just invite you to share your question with others as well, and keep sharing it and keep collecting answers from others because of the importance of having that conversation. If we were that good and we could just give you the answer to it, then we would do this for world peace, not just sexual assault, right? But in an attempt to answer your question, I think Will and I will, just touch on a couple of our approaches that we use to subvert that dynamic. And one is being invitational, seeing men as part of the solution and not part of the problem. So when we think about rape as a men's issue, one of the areas of that conversation that we focus on is that men are confined by rape as well. So where the story of what women have to do to prevent themselves from experiencing assault on a daily basis is this long laundry list of different things that create a culture of fear. One in which women are the projected victims and men are the projected perpetrators. That story of how sexual assault occurs. What we want to do is really initiate a conversation with men that says, hey, we understand that you might feel confined by or afraid of being accused of some form of sexual assault. But have you asked anybody about what it means to engage in consent, or have you had conversations with yourself or with others, with your friends, that are in service of a pro-social conversation, in service of learning more about healthy masculinity? And our invitation to talk about healthy masculinity by asking people who are the strongest men that you know, or what are examples of healthy masculinity that you can think of. We're inviting them in and allowing their storytelling, allowing their vulnerability to come to the surface, and we reinforce it with love. That's the whole idea. And once we've done that a little bit, we've earned a little bit of trust, we've built a little bit of rapport, and then we can start to say, hey, we also want to let you know that this kind of behavior is not acceptable, it's harmful, and let's have a conversation about why it is until we get to the place that you empathize with the way that it's harmful. I don't know, Will, would you add anything in response to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the importance of storytelling. We've done a number of workshops in various communities where, both sides of the spectrum are represented in a particular room. So we could have, a survivor and a perpetrator, both sitting, across the aisle from each other, as it were. So for us in our approach, I think the important thing to lift up is the sharing of stories as a way to, like Jeremy said, build that empathy and create a space where people feel welcome and encouraged to participate.
And, to your follow-up question, Kaifa, yes, the question is right in terms of who is a credible messenger to this work. And in a lot of ways, we really try to role model the importance of men doing this work and working with boys and men in particular, saying we can have this conversation. And at the same time, we worked with a lot of women who, directly engage and have these conversations with men and they are, in many ways, the men that they work with, really receptive to women as facilitators. And so, as we think about and stepping out of the binary too, where this conversation about gender as a whole and is not just defined by your gender identity as a man or a woman, non-binary person, gender fluid, or so on, that we think about, the credible messengers of different communities being, well-suited to reach that community, but not being the exclusive facilitator or exclusive messenger to that community. So we've got time for, maybe one more question. Can we look and see if there's another, is there any more questions that you all want to ask of us? Let's see. So we got one from Caleb, sorry, we were just reading through it, with the narrative that you pointed here. So I'll just read aloud for everyone. What Caleb is really asking is about, how do you, as potentially as a man who is in a social group, how do you combat unhealthy masculinity and those parts of the dominant story in spaces such as friend groups or resident halls, locker rooms, sports teams, especially if you as a member of that group or community are the minority in those spaces and experience being shut down when you do speak up? That's a great question, and it really just, asks a little bit about how, we as a culture and as individuals think about and talk about this issue. And Will, I would invite your expertise here too. I remember my own experiences as a college athlete, having moments when I felt that I wanted to say something and that it was more strategic in terms of my energy to not say something. And, in part, there's the side of me that wants to, agitate and be raising others' awareness of these dominant stories of masculinity, and on the other hand, wanting to preserve my own role in the group and sustain, the connection that I have with them. And so for me, this means backing up. And it means I can't necessarily say something that confronts you in this moment, but I can do something to ask you and invite you into a conversation more generally about the topic. So if you're, as a friend or a part of a team or something, saying something misogynistic, and you're saying, derogatory things about women, I may not be in that moment ready to say that's disrespectful and misogynistic, but ask questions about the relationship with that person that they're talking about, or be able to engage them in a place where, who do you care about, and what are these, relationships that mean something to you? And again, these aren't fully fledged, broad brushstroke answers to your questions, but are just some of the ways that Men Can Stop Rape thinks about how we can engage others in the conversation. Will, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, it just reminds me of that kind of like this unwritten tenet that we have where it's all about, doses, right? So like I'm sure in soccer you talk about, the number of touches that you get a game. So like the more experience you have doing a particular intervention or, having a certain type of conversation, the easier it gets, right? So you may not feel comfortable that first or second time confronting that situation or, getting involved. But that third time you may have, better luck, and you'll feel more confident when it comes time to make that step.
Yes, Will. I so appreciate you talking about touches too. And so we just want to wrap up here and just share one more thing that Yvonne shared, a good article book for this last question called Strategic Questioning by, I think it's Peavy. Is that right, Peavy? We can include this language in our outreach email that also has the webinar recording. And thank you, Yvonne. We've got the link as well. Thank you for sharing that. So we just want to thank you all for joining us today. and for being a part of this conversation with us. We really, really appreciate you, being mindful of the technology as a potential limitation, and engaging us by typing questions in and listening with us today. And so, with that, I just want to conclude and, let everybody know that, again, we've got our Healthy Masculinity resource bundles available for you to check out, and that these are resources that we've prepared to serve you in a sustainable way as much as possible. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and you all enjoy the rest of your week, and stay safe.